I'm so glad that this dope sister is here. I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. First, I want to introduce to you a dear brother. He is truly Red Emma's fan. Red Emma's homeboy, no stranger to the project, is the author of one of our best-selling books, The Black Butterfly. Make some noise for it. Make some noise. Lawrence T. Brown is a writer, researcher, game designer, and urban Afrofuturist, all right? He's the founder and director of the Black Butterfly Academy, which is an educational consulting firm. The author, as I just mentioned, of The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America. He is also the creator of the educational board games Urban Cipher and The Future City Dream Lab Box. See, this is what happens when conscious people put their mind to the creativity. We even get games that will help us transform society. Make some noise one time for Lawrence Brown. As I say, I'm so very glad that this dope sister here this evening is back with us again, because, you know, in this society, I think we're too often captivated by tech, and so we've got to break beyond those obstacles, break through the barriers built around the black butterfly, because in this society, we still have to race after technology, make justice go viral. This is our manifesto. See, right now we are using a people science to transform society. So all I want to know is, can you see it?
Yes.
All you have to do is use your imagination. She is the professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, the founding director of the Ida B. Wells Justice Data Lab, and the award-winning author of People Science, Bodies and Rights on the Stem Cell Frontier, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, Viral Justice, How We Grow the World We Want, and Imagination, a Manifesto. Now you just see what I did there. You see that we're going to get into this book. They are right over here on this table. Come get them so that you can beat the line and get them signed and meet our authors afterwards. I need you to give up that real radical roof-raising Red Emma's noise for presenting Imagination, a Manifesto, Ruha Benjamin.
Okay. All other intros pale in comparison, right? I mean, we had a quiz, we had, fill in the blank, thank you for that analysis. We love you. Thank you all for making time. It's a full week, weeks, and I do appreciate you just taking time out of your schedules to join us in conversation. This is my Morehouse brother. So I just use these book events as excuses to chat with people that I love and respect. And if y'all are here, good, but if not, it's okay. I just appreciate you, your work, everything that you're doing and have done, just being you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So about 15 years ago, when I started my first job as a professor, trying to learn everything that I could about teaching, because they don't teach you how to teach in grad school, I came across a famous study conducted by NASA that was a study focused on creativity. The researchers were interested in measuring the capacity for what they called divergent thinking. That is, the ability to see beyond what's right in front of us and come up with many different ways of thinking through a problem. So what they did was they followed a cohort of 1,600 children over many years, so what they call a longitudinal study, giving them a creativity test that was initially designed for NASA recruits. And the results were shocking in that 98% of 5-year-olds fell into the genius category for divergent thinking. More shocking still was that each year the percentage dropped until only 12% of 15-year-olds and 2% of adults exhibited this creative capacity. In other words, this inherent genius that we all possess is schooled out of us. The very place we should be able to go to incite our imagination is the place where it's routinely squashed, ground down, standardized. Not inevitably, but predictably. And it's not just individual students who suffer, but society as a whole. So what if we took imagination seriously as a site of struggle, not a flight of fancy or something that should be reserved only for self-proclaimed artists, but imagination as a resource, a muscle? How might the power of our collective imagination to transform the world around us be emboldened? So to explore these questions, I want to just try a little exercise here. Let's split the room in half. Let's say pink hat and this way. Your catchphrase is get real. So when I point to you, I want you to say get real like you're trying to shoot me into the sky like a rocket, all right? This side, your catchphrase is be bold, all right? So when I point to you, you're gonna, no, actually, when you tell me get real, I want you to say it like you're trying to squash me in the ground. Be bold, up in the sky. Ready? Let's test it out. Get real. Be bold. Be bold. Get real. Okay, ready? Space travel. Be bold. Free public transportation. Get real. Colonize Mars. Be bold. Decolonize Earth. Get real. AI superintelligence. Cancel student debt. Build underground bunkers to survive the AI apocalypse. Build affordable housing for all. Spend billions on weapons and war. Stop the genocide, ceasefire now. You get the picture. Boldness is rationed while realism is mass-produced. We are in many ways trapped inside the lopsided imagination of those who monopolize power and resources to benefit the few at the expense of the many. These futurists let their own imaginations run wild when it comes to bending our digital and physical realities, but their visions grow limp when it comes to transforming our social reality so that everyone has the chance to live a good and meaningful life. So with these provocations in mind, I thought I'd share very quickly 3 experiences or touchstones that have helped shape my own thinking around imagination. So before I do, I should just say this one thing. I come from many Souths. I was born in Southern India, raised equal parts in South Central LA and South Carolina, spent a lot of my youth in the South Pacific, in Southern Africa, and then Southwest Atlanta. All right. So I bring this perspective of looking at the world from its underbelly to all of my work. So I'm 15 years old. My family packs up house in South Carolina. We're moving to the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. We're living in Majuro, the capital island, but soon after we get there, I make friends and they want to help show me around to the outer islands. And they take me first to a pair of islands, Kwajalein and Ebi. Kwajalein being a US military installation in the middle of the Pacific. And right next door, Ebi, where everyone who was pushed off of Kwajalein now resides. So you get to Kwajalein, it's like you're in suburbia. You don't feel like you're in the Pacific. There's grass and sidewalks and Baskin Robbins and people just walking around with their little strollers and golf courses. It's like Stepford Wives meets The Truman Show. Take a very short ferry ride away, you get to Ebi, which is dubbed the ghetto of the Pacific. High concentration of people living in, tin-roofed homes, very little vegetation, no shade. TB rate is 26 times that of the US, and many other public health issues as a result. And so this is my first sort of seeing really close up these parallel realities. Not parallel so much because the creation of that seeming utopia of Kwajalein relies on the Ebi. It relies on the dystopia. So I began to understand the relationality of these two worlds. Fast forward now, I'm in my 20s, going to grad school in the Bay Area. and I'm looking around trying to figure out a dissertation topic. I have 2 small children, so I can't go somewhere exotic. I need to find something to research right there. At the time, the state of California is proposing a new stem cell initiative because the federal government is cutting off funds due to embryonic research. So proponents of this new field of regenerative medicine, they create a ballot measure so that Californians can vote on whether or not to invest $3 billion into this new field, creating a new state agency devoted solely to stem cell research, creating a new right to research in the Constitution of the state. And so we go to the ballot, 2004. This is Prop 71. And as a result of all of the money spent on this ballot measure, it passes by a slight majority. On that same ballot, Prop 72 is a measure that would have extended worker-based health care, extended how many workers were able to get basic health care. That was voted down. So this is my second sort of big moment where I'm understanding that we collectively can imagine the future of medicine, but healthcare for all is somehow far-fetched. It hit me when I read a headline by a journalist reporting on what was happening, and she said, imagine growing cardiac cells in a petri dish, in a lab, beating in a lab, because the idea is that if we ever need an organ donation, we don't need to find a donor. We can take our own cells, reverse engineer, and that organ would match us so our body wouldn't reject it. So imagine growing cardiac cells beating in a petri dish, but when it comes to imagining empathy for other human beings in our everyday lives and making sure that our public policies reflect that, as in healthcare for all, that's somehow off the table, all right? So this is experience number 2. The last one, again, takes us back to Atlanta. This is back in the fall. I'm back there doing some work. And I'm reminded that the city, one of the city's new nicknames is Techlanta, right? Or Silicon Peach, as they put it, right? Because it's the country, one of the fastest growing tech hubs in the nation. But it's also the city with the highest income inequality in the country. Again, not coincidental, because with tech booms, the inequalities have been exacerbated. People who've lived in places for generations are displaced and discarded. And so as part of managing that growing inequality, you have greater investment in what? Policing. And so we have Cop City, a $90 million facility being imagined and materialized, cutting down Weelaunee Forest, one of the 4 lungs of Atlanta, so it has real important environmental implications. It's located next to a predominantly Black working class community. And so again, in the process of the city materializing its own imagination of what safety looks like, we have a historic mobilization of residents from all walks of life, ATLians pushing back against the lopsided imagination of city officials and corporations that are helping to fund Cop City. And so one of my friends who's been involved in the movement there, she has a young child, and she was at one of the city council meetings with a bunch of other folks, parents. They created a little kid zone so the kids could play while the parents were testifying. And one of the children drew a picture, and my friend sent me a photo of the drawing, and it said, "What did cops do to deserve a playground?" Because their own school had been shuttered in the shadow of Cop City. So even children are pushing back, and this is divergent thinking at its best. From college students to clergy, environmental activists to indigenous leaders, these forest defenders are inviting us into an alternate imagination of the future where our social and our ecological well-being are connected, where true safety comes from connection, not cops, but not without a price. Because also in November, 61 Cop City protesters were arraigned on bogus racketeering and domestic terrorism charges, most facing between 5 and 20 years in prison for nonviolent protests to silence the movement, setting a vile and dangerous precedent. Then earlier this year, Georgia Senate passed a bill criminalizing state bail funds for protest groups and making it illegal for charitable organizations to bail out more than 3 people a year. Soon after that, the state passed a law allowing police to arrest anyone they suspect of being an undocumented immigrant, reminding us that it's not that more police are needed to deal with crime. Rather, more and more people are being criminalized to justify the need for police. So the struggle continues. Like Atlanta's forest defenders and like the young people that are rising up all over the country right now on campuses, we have to be bold when it comes to our social vision. But how? I think the first step is to stop policing the borders of our own imaginations. A world without prisons, ridiculous. Schools that foster the genius of every child, naive. Work that doesn't drive us into the grave, impossible. A society where everyone has food, shelter, love, in your dreams. Exactly. Thank you.
I've always admired Ruha because will set the stage on fire. I want to start by your book. You talk about radical imagination. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah. Absolutely. Sorry, I had to get that kombucha.
That's all right.
So, one of the things the book is doing, I'm not proposing new ideas on imagination so much as I'm tracing a genealogy of thinkers and organizers and dreamers and educators who've all been taking imagination seriously for a long time. So there are many sort of quotes and engagements with existing thinkers. And one of the biggest strands there is radical imagination, but Black radical imagination. And really, to me, that signifies getting to the root of what's ailing us and also building new worlds that are not just cosmetically different, reform, the veneer changes, but really fundamentally transformative. And so I think a radical imagination, on one hand, it sounds like the boldest thing we could do, but also, for me, a lot of things that are categorized as radical is just pure common sense also. So I think part of it is to show that, again, we have to ask ourselves, why are we made to think this is so radical? Like push back against that as well as our sort of process of normalizing and making things seem more possible, right? And so again, thinking about that as a through line throughout, many of thinkers who are categorized in that tradition of a Black radical imagination are also proposing things that to me just make the most sense.
Absolutely. I think this book, it seems to grow out of, or maybe you pulled it from, I think, some of your pre-existing work, Absolutely. It seems like. So I have, Race After Technology, and I want you to take a look and see if you notice something in common about these covers. All right. And then the book before this one was Viral Justice, How We Grow the World We Want. And now, Imagination, a Manifesto. Did anybody see a common thread in these book covers? The sister knows. Well, the thing that I noticed, they're all Black women and girls on the cover, and I'm wondering, I know it was intentional, but what was your thinking behind it?
And also highly melanated Black women.
I noticed that too.
Because they try to pull one on me. Yeah. They, like with Viral Justice, they had my silhouette there. I was like, I'm not putting my silhouette on that book. That is not what we're doing. But yeah, so part of it is to, think about who have typically been the ones who are offering us this radical imagination, like the source of this knowledge, this wisdom, this dreaming, and acknowledging that, not just on the cover, but inside the pages too. Yeah.
Right. I mean, but I love that it's on the cover too.
Thank you.
I love that it's on the cover too. In your last book, you said, beauty is not frivolity, a luxury, nor should be an afterthought. Even under the harshest conditions, we hunger not only for food, but for beauty and meaning, which is why art, aesthetics, and imagination are vital to world building. So I see this theme of imagination carrying through your work and sort of, now you build on it with
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah.
I'm really wondering, how you see imagination, because also I think what you're doing in your work is really talking about technology a lot and our relationship with that technology, and where like these tech bros and tech billionaires and their visions of the future often don't deal with the realities of social oppression
Absolutely.
that we see in our society. But you're saying that we can use imagination
Yeah.
to actually counter their imagination.
Exactly. Yeah. So imagination is not a straightforward good. So part of it is to recognize the violent, the harmful, the dominant imaginaries or imaginations that shape our lives, right? And so one of the ways that I named that in the book is to talk about a eugenics imagination that infects many of our institutions. So we often associate eugenics with like a period in time. We're over that. We often associate it with a certain geography. We displace it onto Germany, ignoring the fact that the Germans learned from American scientists. And so there's all kinds of ways where we distance ourselves from this particular set of practices and ideologies. And what I'm suggesting, not newly, but drawing on the work of many who've proposed, that we never left eugenics behind. In some contexts became more subtle, diffused, and when I say it infects our institutions, I mean like we saw it very vividly during COVID when we saw who was left to die. So that's a more extreme version where the value of different people's lives was so clearly asymmetrical and unequal. But the other way, and this is what I was hinting to in the opening, was that we really see it dramatically in our educational system. And what I'm inviting us to look at is not the big displays of what people's missions and goals are, but look at the imagination in the fine print. So when we look at the budgets of school systems, that's imagination at work. When you decide how much different young people are worth and where we invest those dollars. So it's not just a matter of policy, which is what we need to focus on policy. It's not just a matter of the everyday institutional practices. We need to focus on that. But even underlying that, in my view, like I'm getting to the roots, is also how we even imagine the worth of young people, and that how that then becomes codified in that allocation of money. Organizers talk about budgets as moral documents that tell us who and what we value. And so when we think about how eugenics creates this unequal value, stratifies whose lives are worth left to die, whose potential is worth flourishing, we really see that operating in our educational system and many other contexts. But again, to identify the harmful forms so that we can be very deliberate about cultivating the alternatives, right? So not stopping with the critique, then shifting from critique to creativity and generating our own visions, our own dreams that can materialize in the world around us.
And I think that's something you've mentioned in previous books as well, like how we're in many ways living in other people's imaginations, things that they've imagined. And I'm doing a lot of research on redlining. And there's a paper called The Roots of Redlining by Liddell Wendling and Todd Mischney. And they say before a new system of home finance could be implemented in the 1930s, it had to be imagined.
There we go. There we go.
And I think about when we have red line communities, yellow line communities, blue line communities, green line communities, Roland Park, Mount Washington, these beautiful green laden communities over here. Somebody imagined that. They had to think that up, that this is how we're going to spatially lay out the city. And so how do we use our imagination to help counter that? Because what I like in your work is you're not saying this loosey-goosey kind of imagination. You're talking about a critical thing, critical imagining.
Yeah, and to see it as, in some ways, like if we want to get militant about it, is a battlefield. Like we're struggling over imagination and whose imagination gets to materialize. And again, you can use other words to talk about that. This is just one way that I'm inviting us to think through, in part because I do want us to invest more energy in the alternative imaginaries, right? So by calling imagination, it elicits this idea of creativity and agency and power that I don't want us to cede just because it seems like the dominant imaginations are winning. And so again, thinking about how we do that, it's about practice, you know? And so again, if we're getting schooled out of our imagination, we have to develop that skill again, collectively, individually. And so towards the end of the book, and maybe we'll get there, it's called an imagination incubator. Again, this idea that we want to grow something. And so there are many prompts, activities, questions, exercises that you could do alone, but really it's a collective endeavor, like thinking about participatory budgeting, for example, right, as a site of collective imagination. Thinking about reimagining what universities should be. Thinking about other forms of safety that don't rely on policing. Think about what true health and well-being is that doesn't rely on a corporate medical complex. So in all of these domains, we can develop and build that skill. And in many ways, people are doing that without necessarily naming it collective imagination. Like what our young people are doing right now in the camps is imagining a different world that doesn't require their education to be predicated on the genocide of other young people in another part of the world, right? And so that is an incubator of imagination right there that we're seeing sort of all around the country right now. And so practice. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, part of what I try to do in my own like classrooms is to like take seriously this idea of speculation as a methodology. Like, again, we have to practice it. So a lot of the assignments and exercises that we're doing are trying to build that muscle. And it's very challenging. Like it makes young people who have learned how to jump through all the hoops to get to that point very nervous when you say, we're not going to do that right now. We're not going to jump through hoops. We're going to hula hoop. We're going to play. We're going to speculate. We're going to, you know, do this other, we're going to build this other capacity that you really haven't been rewarded for up until now and haven't really been a focus. And so they get very nervous. But I think it's important. And I think, you know, and it shouldn't just be reserved for formal places of learning. These are exercises that can be in community centers, libraries, bookstores, you know, community gardens, what have you. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things you talk about in the book is like the importance of play.
Yes.
And recreation.
Yes.
And, you know, like that's a part of imagination too, but like play and games have a serious function.
Yes, absolutely. So there I'm really drawing upon a young scholar, Ariana Brazier from Atlanta, Spelman sister, young Spelman sister, who did several years of ethnographic fieldwork in Atlanta public schools, looking at the way that play is deprived and depressed institutionally, but also at the level of community, because she spent a lot of time in people's homes, in playgrounds, and so on. So looking at this phenomenon that analysts call play deprivation, the way that from a very young age, Black children in particular are denied the ability to play fully and freely without punishment. But she also traces the phenomenon that by any means necessary, they continue to play. So even when it's being stifled, they find ways to still imagine outside of the structures that are oppressing them. One example, and so one set of activities she documents is these ghetto games. And one of the things in the schools that she shows is that the young people created their own currency, right? A whole system of currency that wasn't just symbolic, because they would actually trade that currency that they created for goods and services, right? So coming from, a context in which, the families are struggling, the schools are being denied resources, they're like, you know what? We're going to create our own money. And so while it is a story of play deprivation, it's also a story of this imagination that will not be stifled. And so drawing on that, looking at Atlanta, but also looking at other countries, and I'll just give you this one example, where, and the country doesn't ever stick in my brain so I can recall it. We'll find it. It's a European country.
Finland?
Finland,
Yep.
Thank you. I need a little heuristic to help me. Oh, fun, Finland, yay. Okay, I worked it out. Okay, Finland, where the kids don't they're not in school, they don't learn to read and write and do math until they're like 7, 8. You know, the focus for those early years is on play, and they take it seriously. Like the teachers are watching them play, documenting it, because they realize they can learn, they're learning so many things through play, right? Collaboration, you know, they're learning communication, they're learning how to care, mutual aid, you know, whatever. And so what's kind of paradoxical, if you think that play is frivolous, is that these same young people from Finland, when they are tested by these institutions, these international testing agencies that want to rank countries, the kids that are not focused on testing and not focused on this overly disciplined, rigorous curriculum, they out-test everyone else. Because they're like, these stupid tests, let me just get this out the way. I mean, they have much more recess time, much more, attention to all of these other capacities that we should be building. And so again, thinking about that inverse relationship between greater focus on play and fun and speculation and imagination actually makes this stupid, kind of testing and ranking and stuff, it seems, very frivolous. So yeah, there's lots of examples in the book where I'm trying to show us these concepts at work, so they're not just theories, but we can see it on the ground. Yeah.
Speaking of games and play, I have a game that I want to share with you as
Okay.
well.
You're
All right.
the game guru. Go ahead.
That's right. So, all right, this game is called What Does It Do or Not Do? All right, so I need y'all to say it with me. What does it do or not do?
What does it do or not do?
All right, so you're going to pick a card.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you're going to pick a card,
Okay.
and then you're going to read the card,
Okay.
and then we're going to ask, what does it do or not do for our radical imagination?
Oh, okay.
All right.
But I don't have to answer it. I'm just saying the thing. You,
Oh, no, you want to
I
answer.
gotta do everything? Ooh, okay, so I just say this?
Yep.
Okay. Black Panther, the 2018 movie.
What does it for our radical imagination?
Ooh, I have to answer. Okay. So Black Panther gave us a vision of Black people in the future, prospering, healthy, self-governing, autonomous, sovereign, but also in many ways isolated and still hierarchical. And so while it did stretch our imagination at some level, it didn't go as far as it could in many ways. And I think it gave us what one might consider a kind of cosmetic vision of a different future, but it didn't get at all the roots in the way that it could have. So that's my initial
Ooh,
take.
I knew this was going to be good. Yes. All right.
Earthseed, novels by Octavia E. Butler.
For our radical imagination.
Earthseed does everything. I'm a Butler stan,
Yes.
so I don't want to hear nothing about it. Yeah, I named my little apiary beehives in my backyard a bee Earthseed. So
hey.
I love me some Butler. So, Butler, Earthseed, I'll keep it short because I'll go on and on. I mean, she gives us these visions of, again, of futures that are not utopic or dystopic. Right? They are what we might rather call ustopic, that they reflect and extend whatever the problems that we're grappling with now. She asked the what if question. What if we keep doing this? And moves us, just inches us to show us, like, is this what we want based on the current trajectory? And that's why so many people call her prescient. But in many ways, she was just connecting the dots. And if you go into her archives in the Huntington Library in Southern California, you see she was a student of history. She was a student of anthropology, especially medical anthropology. She was looking at headlines about public health catastrophes. So she was bringing in all the facts in order to create these fictions. And in many ways is more true than many of the facts that then are often touted. But the other thing you'll find in her archive, and this is where I'll stop, is that her imagination of Earthseed is also spills over into her imagination of her own life. So, one of the things she writes in her notebooks, very bold and different color markers, is so be it, see to it. So if I say so be it, see to it. So be it, see to it. So be it, see to it. That's manifesting. And she writes in her notebooks, like, well before she was known, well before awards or accomplishments, she was writing out her reality. Like, she would say, I am going to be a New York Times bestselling author. I am going to be able to buy a house in Santa Monica. I am going to be able to do this. Well before it ever seemed like that was on the horizon. And so her imagination spilled over not only into the world building that we see on the page, but in terms of her own personal world. And she's a model for that in so many ways.
I want to riff on that because you talk about that in several of your books, which is like our work is not just out there, it's also in here, like our personal lives, our interpersonal lives. Yeah, like can you riff on that too? Because that's a thing.
That is such
that
a
hit
thing.
me when you said that back in Viral Justice.
Yes. So this is this idea that, we can do two things at once. We can chew, gum, and walk. Okay. We can try to transform these structures, these institutions, these environments out here, but we shouldn't neglect the worlds in here in the process. And it's more than self-care that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the infinite worlds within us, right? And so part of what we can understand, so the world within us, but also our interpersonal, the way that we interact with each other, especially in movement spaces, in activist spaces. I've seen firsthand this week that sometimes people are so fired up that the ends start to justify the means. That the way and the care with which we should be treating each other, it kind of gets shed in the process of working for these external goals. And so one of the sort of mantras for me in my lab with my students and that I try to bring to any space is this idea that we have to be careful with each other so we can be dangerous together. We can't neglect how we treat each other and take for granted that just because we think these goals are righteous, that we can just walk over each other and not treat each other with respect and dignity. So part of it, like if you want to get philosophical, is, what we're doing when we're imagining is that we're prefiguring the world we want, right? There's a whole literature around that, prefiguring politics. So that entails like whatever we want the world to look like in 20 years, in 100 years, in 500 years, we have to be practicing it now. It's not something that we're putting off and waiting that it's going to come. It's like, okay, if we want justice out there, we want to get rid of the carceral system, we want to get rid of these punishing institutions, then we can't punish each other. We have to hold each other accountable, right? We have to like model that thing that we want out there. It's like we're planting the seeds that we want to grow. We can't skip over that step and think, just because we want to end the genocide, then you have people interacting with each other now that are violent and harmful. So we can't do that, at the same time. And so, but that also means that all those little things matter. If we're practicing all those little interactions, and lastly, this is what I'll say, how we talk to each other, but that little voice in our own heads, is a little voice in your head that talks to you. Is that a mean voice? Is that a punishing voice? Is it scolding you for not doing too much, for doing this, doing that? And so the gentleness that we want to see reflected back at us out there, we have to practice with our own selves and we have to practice with each other too.
Really beautiful, really beautiful. And this is the last one,
Okay.
the last card.
I love this game. I'm stealing it. Oh, okay. This extends this. Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey. So,
What does it
or not do? It's
for
doing
our radical
imagination. I love it. Again, goes back to, it connects to the earlier comment. Yes, we are fighting for, labor rights and dignity, but we're also fighting for the right to rest. So yes, to the work conditions, but also not fetishizing work. So if people can't work, they're still valuable. People don't want to work, they're not lazy. And so part of it is to really reimagine the role of rest in our lives, that it's not something that we have to earn, that we have to like put in the work before we can access it. And it's also not productive, right? And so again, going back to the earlier thing of, what we learn through play, what do we learn through daydreaming? What do we learn through like taking a step back? And we're also seeing that again this last week. Again, we've been at the camp, we've been, occupying buildings and so on, but we can't go full steam all the time. So this idea that we have to pace ourselves, burn out, we have to take shifts. You go forward, I step back, vice versa, right? And so really honoring rest and not making people feel bad when they have to or when they want to rest, dream, stop, pause, all of that. And so I appreciate Hershey's work for revitalizing that part of our conversation.
Yeah, because I think she makes it clear that, you can't dream or imagine
Exactly. If you're not resting.
if you're not
Okay.
resting. Like, it's only in rest
Exactly.
that you're able to daydream and you're able to sort of speculate and think more clearly. And so I think that's when I thought about what I was reading in your book and what I heard in her book, it's like, okay, there's a resonance there.
Absolutely.
So I got some more, but we're not going to share those tonight. Why don't y'all give it up one more time for my sister?
Thank you. Yeah. It's 8:00. So what's the deal? Do we have to just stop, or do we take a couple questions?
Oh, wow.
We are not stopping yet because we're going to get into some questions.
Okay.
She's not the only one stealing that idea, Lawrence.
Exactly.
Think I won't use that. Don't be surprised when you see that show up again somewhere.
I'm giving it to her.
I'm going to give you some credit. This is Lawrence Brown's idea. I'm going to give you some credit.
How do we cite games?
I don't know, but I'm going to find out.
Okay.
We need to, whatever the formal way of doing that is.
When y'all hear that, y'all better say, yeah, that was Dr. Brown's idea.
That's right. I needed that. Hey, check this out. There's so much here that we could get into. So much richness to the mind that our two fan members here have presented us. And if we use our imagination, if you will, we can imagine that there's a whole lot of questions in here and we don't have time to get to them all. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance because somebody going to be mad at me because I ain't taking all questions tonight. So we're going to see if we can get through a quick five. We're going to try to take a quick five. What does quick five mean, analysis? That means that we have to keep our questions or comments real brief and truncated and to the point so that we can even get through 5 questions, all right? And I'm going to come around with the mic. And of course, we invite diversity of questioners. I don't think that'll be a problem this evening. So right now, just if you have a question that maybe something that has not been touched on already, or that you really need to get on here. And remember, we're going to have time to come up and meet our authors directly. So you will have time to communicate with them. We will have time in the bookstore. Again, if there's a whole lot of book loving energy, I'll keep the bookstore open late tonight so that we can talk more and do some more things. Right now, let me just see if you have a question right now. I see 1, I see 2, I see 3, 4, and 5. And right there. That's it. Whoop, cut it. Remember yourself. I'm just going left to right. I'm coming around this way first.
And I'll try to give the bullet point version of the response to keep us on time.
Thank you. Who or where are people doing this imagining well?
Yeah.
Like, who can I look up or call or? I mean, besides you.
1-800-999. Exactly. There's so many groups, spaces. And so what the book is really doing is identifying some of those, like as go down those rabbit holes, footnotes, the incubator, every city community that I visit, their organizations. I mean, certainly Professor Brown in Baltimore, many, I just feel like it's like that thing, like once you name it, you start to see it everywhere, right? And so part of it is using the examples in the book as a starting point, but also, really not necessarily looking for that word imagination, but look at where people are doing that twofold work of being critical, fighting for something to end, but also working to grow something else, right? And so it's like that thing that we want to uproot and seed, uproot and seed. And that seeding work, to me, is a form of imagination, because you're saying that what is right in front of me is not all that there is. Yeah.
Come along this way. I had a hand right here.
So, okay, Spelman grad. Hi, y'all. I read an article earlier this year that has been blowing my mind for months. It's called, Does Every Latinx Story Have to Be About Magical Realism? Right? It's excellent article. I encourage everyone to go find it and read it. And it kind of talks about whether does the American literary imagination have room for certain kinds of expression from certain populations, or expect certain the same, and is that site of imagination a intergenerational response to intergenerational traumas? Is it the site where we can imagine freedom? Is it a resistance response, right? Yeah. So that is one thing, and I wanted to ask about literary, about art, about how it intersects with the imaginary. I consume a lot of speculative fiction. And then also the bridge between what we can imagine and then the resistance that we encounter from systems of power. That is where my own imagination falls down. It is hard for me to imagine the pathway. And then, so I wonder about that. Like, where do we bridge from what we can imagine is possible? That sense you said, like it's common sense to us the way it should be, right? But other things are common sense to other people. Everyone's got their own version, right? Where's the bridge where we can turn it into action?
Yes, thank you for that. And for that article, was the thesis that the focus on magical realism, like it's limiting, like it's a box? What was the takeaway?
The person was in a PhD program
and
was coming into responses to her work that seemed to expect it to be magical realism, or respond to it as if it were magical realism. And she was like, I'm writing my ancestral history, actually. This is my truth. So she was kind of encountering
So it's interesting. I think of that as like, even things that seem outwardly to be creative, there are still boxes within that we get pigeonholed, and we get sort of it becomes their own controlling devices in some ways, to say this is all you can do. So Black people can dance, that's very imaginative, but don't try to do the X, Y, and Z, right? And so again, that realm of creativity can become its own sort of stifling set of expectations.
What about the trope of the magical Negro?
Yes. Oh, and did we just make sure that movie just did not do what? I mean, people just boycotted. I mean, I'm so thankful. Yeah, that trailer was abominable. Okay. But yeah, I think that second question is like the question. It's the question. It's not a question that I can answer. It's the question that we all have to answer for ourselves, in terms of when we hit that inevitable sense of pessimism, or where our own imagination shrivels in the face of everything that is out to get us. What do we do? And I feel like that's like an empirical question. It's a question of practice, like what do we do in those moments? For me, one of the things that is really helpful for me is to have a very strong historical imagination. That is to say, I have this quote on my office by Butler, that each of us can do the impossible if we remember that someone has done it before, right? So it's like this thing of like, to be very bold futuristically, we have to think historically about all of the things that at one point seemed unimaginable. No way. Chattel slavery. Imagine your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-grandma, everyone you've ever known has lived under this system. And yet you out here talking about we can end this thing, right? Take public education. reserved only for a small sliver of white male propertied X, Y, and Z. And black folks say, no, we think, and we believe something can be a public education for all. Like, poor kids can learn, black kids can learn. Like, at one point, public education was seen as so unimaginable, and now we dragging our feet mad to get up in the morning, you know, like. So something can go from being impossible to be so mundane that we take it for granted, you know? So for me, that is really helps in those moments, is to remember what was unimaginable before and to draw upon that energy and keep it going. And in that way, I feel a responsibility to future generations, right? To say, how dare I not imagine that they don't have to live under X, Y, and Z conditions? Because I'm setting up what's possible for them. So oftentimes we think we have this mantra about being our ancestors' wildest dreams. And so the invitation here is to be our descendants' wildest dreams. To say, what are we living up to what they need in the future, right? And so that's a way for me that I get through those portals to think beyond those obstacles that are often there. Yeah.
7 generations, as the indigenous
7
fam
generations.
would say. There were 3 more hands, 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just coming right around this way.
Hi, my name is Kadi. I'm a junior electrical engineering major at Morgan State University. First of all, thank you so much. I've never read your book, but I'm definitely going to read it now. I just want to ask, like, where do you think this societal culture of conformity and political culture of boldness comes from? Is it human nature, or do you find it as a result of our dystopia? How do you transform boldness into imagination? Like, is it something, because in our society, we've been stifled out of our inner child, stifled out of our imagination, so it's mainly dormant within us. So how do you transform that thing that's dormant into inspiration? How do you transform that boldness into imaginative, like, action?
Yes, I love that. And you're going to write that book, okay? I love it. I love that question. I tend to, as a sociologist, reject explanations that rely on some idea of human nature as inevitable, inherent, genetic, fixed, immutable, that we just are this way. 1, I think it's lazy. 2, I think that there's too much evidence to show how we're socialized into certain forms of thinking and being. And so when we begin to trace that, like looking at the decisions that are made to get us to the point we're here, rather than some like vague, amorphous thing that just happens to us, let's call out the people, the institutions, the agencies that have actually erected the architecture that we now inhabit, so that 1, we can dismantle it, but also know that then our decisions can build something else. And so for me, in terms of getting, like, channeling that boldness, I think it happens in many, many ways. And different people need different things to trigger that, you know? One of the things we're bearing witness to this last week is the importance of courage and risk-taking in doing that transformative work, where most people around you may be saying, that's stupid, that's this, that's that. But what I am bearing witness to in my own students is a kind of courage that is pushing through those obstacles. And it's not fearlessness because it's scary, you know, but it's moving through those fears and just trying to give that courage legs, like practicing what you preach, you know? And I think we get inspired by each other. Like when I see that inspires me to then take a risk, and that encourages someone else to. And so we are social beings, right? As much as everything tries to make us think that we're these free-floating individuals and, you know, no, we influence each other, but that also means that we can influence each other, right? Positively or not. And so part of it is to, you know, find ways, small or large, to, again, embody what we believe in, embody the kind of world that we want to see in the future, and know that even if we're not fully aware of how it's influencing those around us, it is. It is. When we see each other doing things and taking risks and being courageous and speaking out, that has, and again, this is the concept of viral justice, like it diffuses. And so culture and society are what humans do. These are not abstract things that happen to us. what a culture is what we all decide the norms and values and practices are. And so we shouldn't give up our power and think only, oh, society is acted upon us. We are society. We are culture. We are all cultural workers, whether we own that or not. And we are creating the values through the decisions that we make, the habits of thought and practice that we engage in. So just own that. It's not, the transformations that we're seeking are not gonna come from on high. We cannot look to people in so-called positions of power because there's so much hypocrisy and greed and self-interest. So what I'm saying is that the power is not with those in power, right? And we have to own our collective power and really begin to just like influence that space, whatever spaces that we're in. No space is too insignificant. Like the parents at the playground, the stay-at-home parent, like that is ground zero for culture. Culture is in that playground. How children are learning to treat each other, value each other, cooperate. That is culture. Perhaps more so than the so-called high culture, museum, art, whatever thing that we call culture, you know? And so again, it's about reimagining, reclassifying the things that seem small and insignificant and really shining a light on that and growing that. Yeah.
We had two left. There's one here and there. I'm just coming here and then.
Hi, I'm trans non-binary, and I'm also a Master's of Applied Sociology student. I actually was recommended to come to this talk by one of my sociology professors, who's a Spelman grad as well.
Okay, Spelman.
And in the fall, I will have the opportunity to teach my first ever class. Wow. I'm teaching Intro to Transgender Studies.
Wow, congratulations.
And thank you. It feels like the most important thing I have ever done with my life. And the first thing that I knew, I'm given the opportunity to redesign the syllabus. And the first thing that I knew was that I wanted to teach people how to imagine trans futures. Regardless of if you are trans, how do you imagine a more trans future? And I very much live my life by the value of I deserve to live in trans utopia. Would this happen to me in trans utopia? And in trying to reach that principle and in placing that as sort of like the value, the way that I create value in my life and determine what has value in my life, I am experiencing a lot of rage. And I find that I am really afraid to pass that rage on to my students. And my rage and my imagination are deeply intertwined. And so my question is that something that I should be afraid of? Is my rage something that is valuable to offer them? Because my rage doesn't exist in trans utopia, but we live in trans hell. So.
I love that question. Okay, because I could talk about rage and anger all day. So two things I want to share. Again, the bullet point version. I personally think that rage and anger is useful, and I think it's still going to be there in trans utopia. I think of rage and anger as fuel and something that we can metabolize so that it fuels the work that we do. So when it just stays rage and anger, when we embody that, then it starts to have very physical effects on us in terms of our body and our well-being and our emotions. So part of it is like to use that anger and metabolize it in your work, in your teaching. There's some recommendations I have for you to read and or assign for that class. One is, so the scholar, poet Bettina Judd, who has written a number of works, but just came out with a book called Feelin', F-E-E-L-I-N, looking at the role of emotion and feeling in Black women's literary work. And she also has an article that I would recommend called Towards a Methodology of Anger, that again takes anger seriously in the way that we're talking about imagination seriously, takes anger seriously as a methodology that helps us know certain things. When we suppress our anger, we're refusing to know certain things about the world. So anger is a site of knowledge. The reason you feel that rage is because you're bearing witness to things that are part of that hell, right? So suppressing it means you're cutting off that source of knowledge. And so I think really taking anger and being explicit about its role in knowledge production, not as something that you have to check at the door, but as something that's fundamental about bearing witness and knowing things. I think reframing it, it becomes useful pedagogically. And also I think in terms of your own work, like I have personally found when I'm really angry about something, like my fingers are hitting the keyboards. Like I'm just like, right. I'm like, what happened? You're like, but in those moments, sometimes I feel a lot of anger. But in many ways, I feel, because sometimes it's not adding up to me where I'm thinking, why am I so angry about this? And in those moments, I have felt that it's not just my anger that I'm feeling. It's ancestral anger. It's the anger that those in my ancestral line were not able to express because the result would be death. And so sometimes we're not just feeling our own feelings, right? Again, we're connected not just socially with those on this plane, but in other ways. And so again, taking it seriously, like paying attention to it and using it, channeling it in many different ways, I think is what I would recommend as you do what you're about to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was trying to look up real quick. There's a line from one of my favorite rock groups, Toto, that says something to the effect of, don't you lose your righteous anger, it's yours to keep, which is exactly what you're saying.
Yes,
Well,
exactly
last question.
Right. Exactly right.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I actually attended Hopkins and graduated last year. I currently work for the School of Public Health's communications team for the Department of Health Policy and Management, and I may or may not be going to the encampment after this. But my question for you is, what role, if any, or what your thoughts are on like pragmatism and like the idea of like playing the game? Because obviously the world we currently live in, there are a lot of people that like hold the power that we need, or I don't know, maybe you even have thoughts on that, but like hold like the, I guess, the levels of society we need to reach in order to like make the changes that we want, and like kind of having to like we have to kind of navigate spaces in like certain ways in order to like eventually like reach X place in order to like make Y thing happen. So I guess I'm wondering like with all of our like all this talk about like imagination and like radicalism and stuff, how to like navigate our current spaces and like I guess the balance we have to kind of strike to make those things happen.
Yes, so the answer's in the question, because again, we have to do multiple things at once. We're talking tonight about imagination, but in my view, that kind of visionary disposition or ethos has to go hand in hand with a pragmatic approach and being strategic about certain things. And so it's not either or. It's not like we're either a dreamer or we're a realist, right? And some people might be more disposed to one or the other, but that's why we need a lot of us doing the work, right? Because some of us will be more on the like out here, and some of us are like, well, we have a budget. We need to get food to the camp. And then other people are like on the mic, like, what? You know, we need everyone. You know, like there was one group chat over this last week. We were issuing some letter, and everyone was chiming in on the word choice and how to strategically, pragmatically word. And I was like, this is what happens when the nerds rise up, because we were like, should it be this or that? The comma, the. I was like, the nerds. But we need it all. We need it all. Like, and even if you personally, you know, find the imagination side more challenging, or someone else finds it more being pragmatic, like that's why it has to be collective, like collective struggle. And so viral justice ends by saying we need the loud and ferocious world builders, and we need the quiet and studious ones. All of the different capacities. Really, these camps are societies. Society building and world building is happening in these spaces where we're seeing, wow, we need all of these different things. We can't just, and we shouldn't just laud and celebrate those who are the like outspoken, you know, charismatic, whatever. Like that does us a disservice. And we forget like the person making sure that there's food at their is like we would all starve if there wasn't the pragmatic person being like, no, that's not in the budget, you know? And so again, I think part of it is to revalue all of the different things that we bring to the table and not fetishize and celebrate only those who have the more public-facing, you know, charismatic roles. And so pragmatism is so important in this.
Good. So you mean the next time I'm correcting my friends and fellow poets' papers, and I'm like, that's supposed to be a semicolon right there. I say, Rua said it.
The nerds
Rua
have
said
risen
it.
up.
The nerds are rising up. I like that. I'm blaming it on you now. The book is called Imagination, a Manifesto. Shout out to Philip Glazer, who has been filming for us. Shout out always to the team. And Rua Benjamin, anytime and every time you want to come speak, just let us know when. One big last Radical Red Emma's round of applause for Lawrence Brown and Rua Benjamin.